For those of you who were keeping up with my community tab, you probably saw that poll I did asking you what video I should do next. Whether if it was 25 reasons why Art Rooney II sucks, or if it was the mega rant on how Art Rooney II turned the Steelers from great to a joke. Well, I took a few days to let things play out, and even though the comment section was suggesting mostly the 25 reasons, the poll on the other hand said otherwise, and I think it was like 70 something percent of you that voted on it wanted the mega rant, and that's what you're gonna get. You're gonna get mega rant on how Art Rooney II turned the Steelers from great to a laughingstock. And I'm probably gonna do the 25 reasons video sometime during the upcoming week. We'll see. But yeah. So let's get started with this one. Because get some popcorn ready, get some chips and dip ready, get some wings ready, some fries ready, some pizza ready, whatever. Because this is gonna be a long ass video. Oh yeah. So let's start out with the first part of this video on why Art Rooney Sr. sucked. So yeah, I'm talking about the founding owner, of course. Because over time, it's like, I don't understand why so many people in my fan base act like this guy was good when he really wasn't. I mean, as a matter of fact, like during his ownership, we were literally one of the worst franchises in all of sports history during his ownership. Now, yeah, I mean, I know we all love him just because he is our founder and he's the one who bought the Steelers and started the franchise's establishment. But just because Art Rooney Sr. did that doesn't mean he was great. Because as a matter of fact, he was horrible. Because for damn near the first 40 years of his ownership, not only was this team constantly recycling garbage no-name quarterbacks and garbage no-name coaches time and time again, the team had just one playoff appearance in 1947, and that's where we got shut out in the first round by the Eagles 21-0. And that was in an era despite the fact that there was a lot less teams in the league at the time. Right? So like, how the fuck does that even make a great owner, let alone a good to okay owner? How? If anything, Dan Rooney is the one who deserves a statue outside the stadium, way more so than Art Rooney Sr. ever will, because all the fuck he did was just smoke a big ass blunt and say, "Oh, they look like the same old Steelers." Yeah, because your ownership sucks ass, bruh. I mean, goddamn. Because the thing is, you see how, yes, the steel curtain happened under his ownership, which we will get to later on in the video. But even then, it took a number of people, other guys' involvement, who knew much more about running a football team and building a football team than Art Rooney Sr. did. And not so much to do with Mr. Big Ass Blunt Smoker, Art Rooney Sr. himself. So, anyways, so let's just get into the second part of the video. This will easily be the longest, of course. And this is how Dan Rooney made the Steelers great and why he was a brilliant football executive. So this part of the video could be broken down into I would say about, like 5 or 6 different vols. So vol 1, vol 2, vol 3, vol 4, and so on. So let's get into vol 1, the slow building process. So of course, Dan Rooney, so he began his involvement in the franchise in 1955 after graduating from college. And of course, this was during a time where the team was still bottom of the barrel. one of the worst franchises in not just football history, but all sports history at the time. But then later on, there came a part to where, because this was the very beginning of where Steeler greatness began. This was where he lured in scout Bill Nunn. So Bill Nunn was a guy who, covered football as a columnist for the Pittsburgh Courier. Though he didn't, do much coverage on the Steelers because he didn't like the way they did business. And Dan Rooney, upon learning about him, he asked him in for a one-on-one meeting with Nunn, and he would then convince him to become a scout for the team. Part-time starting in 1966, until he eventually became a starter, a full-time scout in 1969. Starter. And this turned out to be a great decision, because not only did it pan out very well for us, which I'll get to in a minute, but you also gotta remember, this was done in an era where there was very few, if not any, African American, black scouts at all. Right? So yeah, Dan Rooney made a pretty brilliant move, having an eye for what Bill Nunn was about. So, and of course, 69, that was where Dan Rooney became the head of the day-to-day operations, kind of basically the general manager of that era. And that was where he hired Chuck Noll in 1969, and how that became is that because Don Shula, at the time when he was the head coach of the Baltimore Colts, his defensive coordinator was, you guessed it, Chuck Noll. And Don Shula recommended the job to Chuck Noll, as well as recommending the Steelers to hire him. Which again was part of leading to what then became. So yeah, I mean, it took, Chuck Noll and Dan Rooney a few years to build the Steelers, into something, drafting Bradshaw, drafting Mean Joe Green, drafting L.C. Greenwood, and more guys to follow, which we'll get into a little bit. But yeah, so Chuck Noll, he was hired in Dan Rooney hires him in 1969. It took Chuck Noll and Dan Rooney a little bit to build the team up into a contender. And it took from there until 1972, where the Immaculate Reception happened, and only for a week later to lose to Don Shula's Dolphins, who went 17-0 that year. So, we weren't champions yet, but we were legit contenders for sure. And then, here it comes. The 1974 draft class, which is widely considered the greatest draft class of all time. And not only did Bill Nunn's scouting become a very big part in building what then became the Steel Curtain, dynasty, but Dan Rooney also played a very, big part of it, because, he saw that the team while they were a contender, he saw the pieces that they needed, like Lynn Swann, like Jack Lambert, like John Stallworth, etc. In order to build a team that could win championships. And Dan Rooney, Bill Nunn, and Chuck Noll, they were the masterminds behind that. And if it wasn't for those three, the guy that my fan base for some odd reason loves to praise as his all-time great, Art Rooney Sr. Art Rooney Sr. would have never saw any of the success that followed after this all-time great, perhaps the greatest of all time, draft class that took place. So, of course, it led to back-to-back championships in 74 and 75, and then Okay, a couple of shortcomings in 76 and 77, but then we bounced back with another back-to-back championship run in 78 and 79, making it 4 Super Bowls in 6 seasons, cementing and further establishing the dynasty status. That was pretty much the Vol 2, the glory days. Talking about that 74 draft class and how it turned us into a dynasty. But now let's get into Vol 3. Rough 80 stretch. So it was like right here. Basically our draft quality went downhill in the latter part of the 70s, despite the fact that we were still able to win 2 more championships. But it was by, the mid 80s to where it just became clear that, Chuck Noll and Art Rooney Jr. could no longer function as a team together. Hence why the playoff appearances became rare. And it's like, our front office moves just weren't that good. And this was where Dan Rooney had to step in. So he had to choose either to fire Chuck Noll or fire his brother, Art Rooney Jr. And what does Dan Rooney do? He had the big enough balls to fire his brother. Yeah. And now, even though Ed Bichetti, the longtime, sports writer that we once had for the team, said, would go on to say that, firing Art Rooney Jr. wouldn't improve communication between Noll and the scouting department. This, in their next 2 drafts, did end up, leading to drafting future Hall of Famers like Rod Woodson, like Dermontti Dawson, as well as other, very good players in Greg Lloyd, Merrill Hodge, Carnell Lake, and Jerry Olszewski, right? And I understand, Dan Rooney wasn't exactly perfect. I mean, he did make, some mistakes, like passing on Dan Marino. I mean, I wouldn't say he passed on Joe Montana because Bradshaw at the time had made it clear that he still wanted to play and he was, still ready to go. But yes, Dan Rooney did make a mistake in passing on Dan Marino, even though Dan Marino came up short of winning a Super Bowl. But still, he was way better than all the quarterbacks, the trash quarterbacks that we would constantly recycle throughout the 80s and even which we will get to later on into the 90s. So, and then of course, it was at 1988 after that season ended. So, it was a 5-11 season in 1988. So Dan told Noll that he had to make, changes on the coaching staff, including demoting Tony Dungy from defensive coordinator to the defensive backs coach, which did end up, happening, but that led to Tony Dungy quitting to go to another team and coach. And he even said that Noll's favorite, Jed Hudges, had to go as well. And in one of those, 11 losses, Rooney even called out the stupid play calling among Noll's staff. And then okay, so what it was is that Dan Rooney, what he understood is that the team they didn't need a full-on hammer to come down on everybody. Like, no, he saw that the team needed surgical changes rather than a full-on house cleaning to make things right, which got us back into the playoffs in 1989. Granted, the first 2 losses of that season were 2 of the worst, if not the 2 worst blowout losses that the franchise has ever, suffered. Right? But But nonetheless, it got us back to the playoffs, and we even won a playoff game that year. So, but then of course came 1991 after another failed season. So Dan Rooney once again told Chuck Noll he had to make changes, especially among the offensive staff, which included getting rid of firing offensive coordinator Joe Walton. And Dan Rooney said that Noll had to, because he saw that Noll was, he wasn't the same. He wasn't who he used to be. So even though Dan Rooney was a little too patient with him, in my opinion, he told him that he had to make changes on the offensive staff, or else Noll would not keep his job as head coach. So Noll, he didn't want to fire his offensive coordinator, as Dan Rooney told him to, if he wanted to keep his job. So what does Chuck Noll do? He resigned. And again, it may not have been the most perfect way to handle it, because Dan Rooney was trying to keep the team stable rather than just full-on tank. But even in that situation, Dan Rooney was doing it right, unlike Art Rooney II nowadays, which I'll get to him towards the end of the video. But Dan Rooney at least understood in this case that there has to be a change. So before he could fire Chuck Noll stepped down on his own. And that's what, led to the hiring of Bill Cowher. So anyway, let's get into Vol number 4. Building champions once again. And again, this was a very slow progress, because so what happened is Dan Rooney actually let's start right here. So Tom Donahoe, the GM for us throughout the 90s up until the year 2000. So because Tom Donahoe, he was a very good GM, don't get it twisted. Like, he was the reason why we were, while maybe not champions, but we were serious contenders in the 90s, especially like the early to mid 90s, from 92 to 97. And reasons for that is because in a time where we struggled to compete in free agency, despite that, Tom helped map out a strategy in re-signing key free agents before their contracts expired. As he also made good under the radar free agency moves, like future Hall of Famer Kevin Green, and of course some decent players like fullback John Williams and D.E. Ray Seals. And he was even good at finding gems in the mid to late rounds of drafts, which allowed the Steelers to, reload in the face of, annual free agent departures. So therefore, we wouldn't have to face, a full-on rebuild. But it eventually came to a point in a similar situation to the the Art Rooney Jr. and Chuck Noll thing. Donahoe and Cowher's relationship started out well, but then it began to deteriorate in the very late 90s to 2000. So Dan Rooney had a pretty tough decision to make, because on one end, Bill Cowher was a very good head coach. It's just that the AFC Championship chokes were quite maddening, which even led to fans calling for his job. Which, yes, I learned that from the older people in my fan base. They've told me before that fans were calling for Bill Cowher's job. But on the other side of things, you had Tom Donahoe, who was playing a good part on why we were remaining stable as contenders. even though it wasn't, enough to win us a Super Bowl. And Dan Rooney, understanding this, he chose to fire Tom Donahoe instead of Bill Cowher, which many at first did not understand. Many thought that Dan Rooney got rid of the wrong guy. But here's the plot. He had a plan in hiring another GM in Kevin Colbert, who built a Steelers team that eventually won 2 Super Bowls in the mid to late 2000s. An upgrade compared to just being championship contenders in the 90s, where we had some strong teams, but we were AFC Championship / Super Bowl chokers at the time. And not only was Kevin Colbert good, not only did he do that, but he was even able to find UDFA, undrafted free agent gems in guys like running back Fast Willie Parker and Debo James Harrison, one of my all-time favorites. Further proving that Dan Rooney knew more than his critics, and he knew more than anybody in that organization for a very long time since he started working within the Steelers franchise. And then of course, how did that start? Where we began, winning the championship. So it started with drafting Big Ben in 2004. So, and even though Tommy Maddox, struggled in 2003, quarterback wasn't really considered like a major, need for us in the draft, because the team was originally focused on drafting offensive tackle out of Arkansas and Sean Andrews. And Dan Rooney understood that he once, made a huge mistake in passing on Dan Marino, which led to us going through long-term, struggles in finding a franchise quarterback. Him seeing that Tommy Maddox just wasn't, good enough for us to win a championship. And for those reasons, Dan Rooney, understanding all of this, he shifted everybody within the front office. Everybody in the front office, Dan Rooney stepped in and shifted the conversation to drafting Ben Roethlisberger, which of course led to that sensational rookie year in 2004. And of course, second year we win the Super Bowl, Super Bowl 40. Right. Then shortly after that, after that, Jerome Bettis stepped down, and then Jerome Bettis retired after winning Super Bowl 40. Then the year after that, Bill Cowher stepped down. So for the first time in 15 years since Chuck Noll, we had to look for a new coach. So Noll stepped down. He was ran out by Dan Rooney. No, the fuck he wasn't. No, the fuck he wasn't ran out. Dan Rooney saw that Chuck Noll was washed, and he realized that that he had to make a change by hiring Bill Cowher, because Noll, even though Noll stepped down before Dan Rooney could fire him, and here we were once again. Bill Cowher steps down in 2007, but then here comes Vol 5, the slow death jab, hiring Mike Tomlin. And I know a lot of you dumbass families are going to sit here and say, he took an 8-8 team and took them to the playoffs. Get the fuck out of here. No, the fuck he did not take an 8-8 team to the playoffs. What happened in 2006 is, you see, the team was, not only were they, hung over from winning Super Bowl 40, Cowher's wife passed away, so his mind wasn't, as his head wasn't really that much into the game that season, and Big Ben played the whole year injured after he nearly died in a motorcycle crash in the 2006 offseason. So yeah. what it really went down is Tomlin won with Bill Cowher's players. He won with what Bill Cowher built, and then 2 years later, he got there again with half of what Bill Cowher built, and that time lost. And a year after that, here is where the real downfall begins. Losing to Tim Tebow, which then led to Tomlin foolishly firing offensive coordinator Bruce Arians. Because Bruce Arians was not only was he, pissed off about when he found out that the Steelers fired him, but it's like he even felt betrayed. Okay, he even felt betrayed by the Steelers when Tomlin fired him, which then led to us recycling offensive coordinators to follow in the distant future. But before we get to that, let's talk about So let's talk about from 2013 to like the mid 2010s, where we started building a juggernaut on offense. Given that Bill Cowher's players, especially on the defense, were aging. So it's like 2013. Now is where Le'Veon Bell came in. And this was when Antonio Brown was slowly starting to merge into a star. And then 2013. I mean, the defense was aged out because some of Cowher's players were still playing. But on the other side of things, we had an upcoming offense with a couple of young stars in Brown and Bell, as well as a veteran quarterback in Big Ben, who at the time was starting to get better with age. But then of course, let's talk about the peak of a Tomlin built Steelers team, which would be 2016 and 2017. So, 2016, we go 11-5, lose the AFC Championship game to New England. And of course, 2017, we go 13-3 again. Then, but of course, the latter part of that season, now is where the infamous Jesse James touchdown ended up getting taken back. But then, here's where the beginning of the end begins. Vol 6. The beginning of the end. Right, so this is kind of in between what I was just talking about, where Dan Rooney passes away and Art Rooney II takes over. So Dan Rooney passes away April 2017. As I talked about the 13-3 season we had in 2017, but it was the January 2018 divisional round loss to Jacksonville, which officially led to a long-term cycle of us being stuck in mediocrity. So there's a number of things to talk about. So after that game against Jacksonville, where the defense gets absolutely gashed and allows 38 of the 45 points that Jacksonville scored, because Leonard Fournette was just running all over us. And even Blake Bortles made some plays. Now, granted, Blake Bortles, I know Tommy has to sit there and say, oh, Blake Bortles played like Drew Brees. Shut the fuck up. No, the fuck he didn't. Blake Bortles played a good game manager role in that game. He wasn't sacked, didn't turn the ball over. He only completed a little more than half of his passes. I think he went 14 for 26. I forget the amount of yards he had. But, yeah, Bortles played a decent game manager role, and he even had plays where he was gashing the Steelers on the ground and one or two with his arm. So, yeah, that's what it was. It's not like he fucking went full Tom Brady, full Patrick Mahomes, or full Drew Brees, or Peyton Manning, or anything like that, like the dumb fucks in my fan base act like he did. No. But regardless, it was an ugly loss. So you would think we would that Art Rooney II would fire the defensive coordinator in Keith Butler rather than the offensive coordinator in Todd Haley, who, yeah, I understand the fans hated him and were calling for his job, but he was the one that was getting points put on the board against a very good Saxonville defense. Fucking gay ass nickname, Saxonville. You would think that they would keep him and fire Keith Butler, right? The guy whose defense got gashed all day that game. But no, we fire Todd Haley and we keep Keith Butler. One of the many dumb decisions that Art Rooney II has made post Dan Rooney's passing. And it has also been stuff like overpaying players who suck and or are old and washed. Like, the fact that Art II was enabling this team to overpay bums like Mike Mitchell, who, yes, after 2017 was cut, because, you know, the guy was a fucking bum. And I've been told by dumbass fan base that back then that the guy sucked. But I used to get heat for it at the time. But yeah, and it's also led to us overpaying guys like Scam Hayward. You know, his fat ass always begging for money that he didn't deserve. Because while he has been a good player, he's always been overpaid. And even when Ben was starting to clearly become washed, Art Rooney II was shoving money down his throat as well, which of course had us in cap hell, because Art II, on one end, he's been very cheap, but yet he has no fucking problem paying guys who either suck or are old and washed, guys who haven't done shit in a while, or at the very least haven't been great in a while, paying them all the money, leaving us cap held to where we can't build in free agency. As well as stuff like poor drafting. But one major example that I want to give, like back in 2019, it was when we traded Antonio Brown, we lose Le'Veon Bell. So we are basically heading into a small rebuild, right? And 2019, where Ben blows his elbow out, he's done for the year in week 2. Art Rooney II, like the dumb fuck that he is, he pushes the front office to make a desperate move, trading away our potential future quarterback in a first round pick, where we were on track to tank, right? But he makes a desperate trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick, which, yes, led to the defense making significant improvement to where they were one of the best defenses in the league that year. But what it really did in the long run is that it really cost us, because it got us an 8-8 record in the mushy middle, one of many mushy middle seasons to come. But yeah, that's what it did in 2019. All because Art Rooney II was too fucking stubborn to face a goddamn fucking rebuild. Right? That's what he did. He was too stubborn to face a rebuild. And so instead of embracing it, he decides to panic, and he forces Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin to make a desperate move, which killed our future, trading away a first round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Because yeah, the team was good but not great in 2020. But who knows, if we were to suck bad enough in 2019 to land a franchise quarterback, like, who knows? Like, we could have possibly been playing in the AFC Championship, maybe even the Super Bowl in the 2020 season. But nope, we stick with the old Big Ben, who was playing okay at first, but then late in the year, that was where he proved to be washed up. And that was where the Browns wildcard fiasco came along. And this is where I want to stop for a bit. So, the last 2 playoff losses in the post Dan Rooney in a post Dan Rooney's passing era. We start out down 21-0 to Jacksonville before halftime, and even 28-7 before halftime. And we're down 28-0 to the Browns in the wild card round before the end of the first fucking quarter. Right? So, instead of holding anybody accountable, what does Art Rooney II do? He keeps everybody, and his message is this. But let me get some water first. Alright, so what exactly was Art Rooney II's message in the offseason? It wasn't about rebuild when that Browns wildcard fiasco was the first clear and obvious sign, if it wasn't 2019, that the team absolutely needed a rebuild. What does he do? He says, I want us to be as competitive as possible in 2021. You know, we don't do rebuilds. We need to win now. Right? Which, of course, further keeping us in mediocrity because, and I understand, as I was saying earlier, Dan Rooney wasn't perfect. Because he did prove to be a little too patient on the tail end of Chuck Noll's career, even though he still forced him to make changes nonetheless. And as I was saying earlier, to some people who may think, he was run out. No, the fuck he wasn't run out. It was time for him to go, as I was saying. But if Dan Rooney was alive for the Jaguars' divisional round loss, he would have strongly forced Tomlin to make changes, a lot of changes on both sides of the ball after that loss, and maybe even fired him. But if he was alive for the Browns wild card clown show, Dan Rooney would have. I think he would have fired him right off the bat, like before he walks off the field. I really do think that. I think Dan Rooney would have said enough is enough. Tomlin, get the fuck out of here. Absolutely disgraceful game. I really do think Dan Rooney would have fired him at the time. So Art Rooney II. So basically, what he did after in the 2021 offseason, you see, what he said. So basically, what he was trying to do is that he was trying to keep the same stability, just like his dad Dan Rooney used to. But the problem is this: Art Rooney II had no idea how to. Like, he didn't understand all the same philosophies in winning that his dad once did. Like, he didn't look into he wasn't able to look into Tomlin and his coaching staff and see what he needed to change and what kind of changes that were needed. Like, no, he sticks with the same old clown show. Other than, of course, letting Randy Shitner's contract expire as offensive coordinator, because like when we fired Todd Haley, it led to Randy Fichtner, who was worse, that Matt Canada, who was even worse, and of course Arthur Smith, who was basically just a Tomlin, puppet. Except of course he was maybe a little better than Randy Fichtner in Canada, but even then that doesn't really say much. But yeah, it's like throughout the 2020s, it has become clear as day that Art Rooney II just has no idea what he's doing, and like he has no vision on what needs to change, and doesn't have any balls to do it whatsoever. Because Art Rooney II is afraid that if he forces changes to happen, and they do happen, he's all too afraid of facing a bottom of the barrel year, where we're one of the worst teams in the league. Because the closest thing to change that has ever happened under Art Rooney II is something like this, that in my opinion, is one of the biggest reasons why we have been set back for a long time. It has been the constant in-house promotions to where the OC and DC get worse and worse, right? That's all that has changed because Art II has been too lazy and too fucking dumb to look outside the box to hire people. That is what has one of the biggest things that has set this team back is in-house promotion after in-house promotion to where the guys who are on their way who no longer have the position are officially on their way out from the organization, which of course would only drain the coaching staff into becoming worse and worse and more clueless and more clueless. If Dan Rooney was a lot like Dan Rooney would have never let this happen. Granted, he is the one that hired Mike Tomlin because Tomlin was a trash fucking DEI hire, right? But even though Dan Rooney hired him, if Dan Rooney was alive much longer than 2017, he definitely would have eventually saw that it would have been time for Tomlin to go. He really would have, and he would not have enabled these dumb in-house promotions. He would have realized that it was time for a change. If anything, I think Dan Rooney may have been ahead of his time back in the mid-2020s, where he started building on offense, just seeing how aged up our defense was, because I think Dan Rooney may have seen that the team needed to build a good offense for the future, because as everyone says, it's an offensive league, right? I think Dan Rooney was very much ahead of his time when he started to build the team with offense. Now, granted, I mean, Tomlin kind of made the team soft by building them from physicality to finesse. But still, I do think that keeping the team competitive in the Killer B era where Bill Cowher's defense was becoming washed up, I do think that was a Dan Rooney thing, not a Mike Tomlin thing. But anyways, let's go back to how Art Rooney II has been utterly ruining this franchise. From in-house promotions, piss poor drafting, right? Because when Kevin Colbert retired, instead of looking for a real GMing candidate, what does Art Rooney II do? He in-house promotes general manager Omar Khan to be general manager, a guy who's a bald fucking bean counter who is not a football GM at all. Because if he was just quote unquote con artist or con man, right? If he really was that, if he got all the hype that the fans, that the dumb deluded fucking fans of my fan base like to give him and shit, like, we would be winning 13 plus games every single year. And I've been telling people for the past couple of years that Omar Khan is overrated and that he is not a football GM. Okay? What Art Rooney II doesn't understand is you can't, ask a fucking banker to build a football team. It's just fucking laughable. Right? I mean, yeah, he was good at handling the cap, but Omar Khan is a bean counter and nothing more. That's all the fuck he is. A bean counter, not a football guy, and has no business being a football GM. None. And another thing, another thing that Art II does not understand. And this is pretty much where I'm going to, conclude the MEGA-RANT. This will be the most intense part, so get ready. So to conclude with the state of this team, not only is this team stuck in mediocrity because of Art Rooney II's bad ownership, not getting with the times and everything, right? But it's also for the fact that he doesn't understand that in today's league, stability no longer works. Okay? Because back then, that's what Dan Rooney did. he was never a guy that liked to tank. He always tried to keep the team stable. And Art II is still stuck living in that era, trying to do that, when for one, he doesn't understand the philosophies on how to do it the way his dad did. But you see, hiring Mike McCarthy alone, right? Like, Dan Rooney hired a young DC in Chuck Noll, a young DC in Bill Cowher, and a young DC in Mike Tomlin back when defense was the main face of football. Nowadays it's offense, which, on one end, Art II sees that, but yet he hires an old fat fucking Mike McCarthy, who was basically the white and fat version of Mike Dumlin. And he hired him because he's so desperate to not face a rebuild, and he wants to keep the team fucking stable in mediocrity. You see, he doesn't understand that in today's league, stability no longer works, and you have to tank. You have to go through at least a couple of bad years in order to become great. Like here's a few examples. Once I get some more water, of course. 2019, the Bengals blow it all up. Right? They blow it all up. They clean house. They tank for Joe Burrow. And in 2020, they use another bad year to try and keep on building the roster and everything. Then bam, 2021, they go to the Super Bowl, even though they lost to the Rams. 2023, even though the Pew Stinkle and the Flatrius were not trying to tank that year, they tried to remain stable, only to end up being a lot worse than Bob Kraft expected them to. So only then after, going 4-13 in 2023, he hires Gerard Mayo as a tank command coach for another rebuilding year to rebuild the roster. And look at them now. My most hated fucking team is in the Super Bowl before we can ever win a fucking playoff game, because our owner's a dumb bitch who doesn't understand how football operates these days. And for those reasons, he needs to step down if he's not gonna commit to a rebuild. And he needs to hand over control to Dan Rooney III. Dumbass owner. Like, Art II has a fucking vagina. But yeah, all because of Art Mitch McConnell Rooney II's dumbass ownership. Not only is this team currently stuck in mediocrity, unless of course it eventually blows up in our face. Not only does this team have no future, because Art II's always thinking about, we don't do rebuilds. That's for pussies. We need to win now. Get the fuck out of here. But yeah, this team has no future, no forward thinking, nothing to look forward to, no new and up and coming, stars besides maybe Derek Carman, besides maybe Joey Porter Jr. and Nick Herbig, I guess. No balls to move on from guys who need to be moved on from. None of that. No direction. No nothing. That's where his team is. Always thinking about past nostalgia, trying to chase past glory and desperation to avoid a rebuild because win now. Right? This team is lost in purgatory. Until we either clean house or until it eventually blows up in our fucking faces. And even until Art Rooney II officially steps down, I hate to say it, but I don't expect this team to get anywhere near being a contender again, thanks to this swamp that has yet to be drained, which the head of the swamp being Art Rooney II. Him and all the bullshit that he has enabled from coaches and money laundering players like Watt, Hayward, Rodgers, etc. So yeah, this team is a mediocre, trash-ass mess, and I fucking hate it. I fucking hate Art II to a great, mighty extent for it. And I hate him in real life for it too. Okay? Do not get that twisted. I fucking hate Art Rooney II in real life. My hate for him on the internet is it's not some manufactured shit. This is what I honestly think about him in real life. And that's why Dan Rooney III has to take over. Because once Dan Rooney passed away, that was where things began to slowly but surely go downhill. It's just that Art II has been putting band-aids on fucking gaping ass wounds to hide it. It pisses me off too. But anyways, with that said, with how Art II has turned his team into a fucking joke, that'll do it for my longest video ever, surpassing the record originally held by 25 reasons why I absolutely hate the Pew Stinkle and Deflatriots. This is my new longest video, and I'm fucking proud of it. Because I said a lot of stuff that needed to be said here. So anyways, Mega Rant is over, and so is this video. I am out.